Thanks for joining us today. My name is Dr. Dusty Jessen, and I am an audiologist in a private practice ear, nose, and throat clinic in the Denver area. And I'm also the founder of Cut to the Chase Communication, which is a company specializing in oral rehabilitation products and services for hearing care providers. I have a financial relationship with ASHA for this presentation in the form of a speaker honorarium. And I also have a financial relationship as the owner of Cut to the Chase Communication because we provide products and services related to the content of this presentation. And I have no non-financial relationships to disclose. So the purpose of this presentation is to dig into what oral rehabilitation really is and why it is so very important in a private practice setting. And then we'll really get into how we can make oral rehabilitation work in a private practice setting. So let's start by defining oral rehabilitation. Montano and Spitzer define oral rehab as a person-centered approach to assessment and management of hearing loss that encourages the creation of a therapeutic environment conducive to a shared decision process, which is necessary to explore and reduce the impact of hearing loss on communication, activities, and participations. It's kind of a mouthful. In 2007, Dr. Arthur Boothroyd defined oral rehab as the reduction of hearing loss-induced deficits of function, activity, participation, and quality of life through sensory management, instruction, perceptual training, and counseling. So he took it a step forward to explain the components that should be incorporated in an oral rehab program. But really, oral rehab is just the comprehensive services that we as hearing care providers give to our patients or offer to our patients. And so it can include all of the following components: cochlear implants, hearing aids, auditory training, group sessions, patient-centered care, assistive listening devices, counseling, education, speech reading, communication strategies. All of that is incorporated in oral rehabilitation. That is what a comprehensive oral rehab program should include. Unfortunately, in private practice, we're faced with certain challenges that leave us to use a more technocentric model of oral rehab rather than a clinician-centered model of oral rehab. So in this figure, you can see the model that's very commonly used, and the technology, being the hearing aids and the wireless accessories, is the focus of this model. And then the arguably, possibly more important components of education and resources, communication strategies, are kind of tucked in as afterthoughts. So I would like to propose a different model, and this is a model that puts the clinician at the forefront. So as you can see at the base of this model, the clinician is providing education, resources, communication strategies, and group classes. And this needs to be provided to every single patient that comes to us, because if they're seeking our services, that means they're experiencing some perceived difficulty. And so we need to be addressing those difficulties whether or not they need hearing aids or want hearing aids. And then the next step in this model is to provide audibility for those patients who need it, who have hearing loss, and that can be provided in the form of hearing aids, assistive listening devices, or personal sound amplifiers. And then there are some patients who need to go a step further, where hearing aids and the education is not quite enough for them, and that's when we get into the auditory training. So there are two forms of auditory training. The first is computerized auditory training, and that is nice for a busy clinic situation because the patient typically does computerized training on their own at home. But there are those patients who need a more one-on-one approach, and so clinician-directed auditory training serves that purpose. So why is it so important that we as private practice clinicians are providing oral rehab for every single patient? Well, first of all, hearing aids just can't do it all. For patients who have deficits in spectral and temporal resolution, and also for our aging population who are experiencing age-related cognitive changes in their working memory and their speed of processing, hearing aids cannot address those issues on their own. And from a business standpoint, hearing aids are really starting to be seen as commodity items. Hearing aids can be purchased at big box stores like Costco. They can be purchased from online retailers, from storefront retailers. And so the patients have a lot of options when it comes to purchasing hearing aids. And so there's a growing need as professionals to set ourselves apart from those commodity options. And also, Aural Rehab really brings the professional back to the forefront because we're focusing on service versus technology. So it's so very important. Now, most private practice audiologists do understand how important aural rehab is to our practices and to our patients. However, we do face unique challenges that may not be faced in other settings. So this flow chart here gives you an idea of the challenges that I face on a regular basis. These are the tasks that I have to complete in my practice on a daily basis. I know that each audiologist may have a different organization in their practice, but this is what I face on a regular basis. So I am responsible for the diagnostics in the form of the diagnostics for the ENT as well as diagnostics for hearing aid evaluations. I'm responsible for the treatment, the aural rehab and the provision of hearing aids. I'm also responsible for office tasks like going through the mail, going through our emails, returning phone calls, going through invoices. And I'm also responsible for trainings, both the manufacturer trainings that I receive, as well as trainings that I give to our staff on various topics. And finally, I'm responsible for the marketing. So I have to put out social media posts, and I'm also responsible for all community outreach. So I have a lot on my plate. Private practice audiologists have a lot on our plates. And so sometimes it's hard to fit in the aural rehabilitation that we know is so important. And sometimes that leads us to treating our patients in a way that we're not so proud of. So I'm going to give you an example of a not so proud moment. This patient was a 67-year-old male. He had a mild sloping to severe sensory neural hearing loss above 2,000 hertz. He had no self-perceived difficulty. He didn't feel like he had any hearing trouble at all. And he believed that his difficulties were exclusively the problem of his wife, who always talked to him from another room and mumbled and on and on. So he agreed to a trial with hearing aids just to placate his spouse so that she would leave him alone. So here is our not so proud process that we used for this patient. Because of a scheduling mistake, this patient was scheduled for a hearing aid evaluation appointment for just 45 minutes. And this really cut down on our time with this patient, so we had to rush through this visit. So this was the process that we followed. We gave him one intake questionnaire, which was our hearing health assessment. And this questionnaire just asks basics about ear history and hearing health. For diagnostics, we only had time for a screening audiogram versus a diagnostic audiogram. Our plan was simply a trial with hearing aids because that's what the patient came in expecting, and so we went ahead and followed his expectations and fit him with hearing aids that very day. And the result of all of this was that he returned 3 days later and returned the hearing aids for credit. It was kind of an awkward situation, really kind of a waste of time on his part and ours. So what did I learn from this? Well, number one, I learned that patient-centered care does not mean patient-dictated care. So just because the patient came in with certain expectations didn't mean that I necessarily had to meet his expectations. So I learned that we can't cut corners. I really needed to be the professional in that situation, and I needed to come in and tell him my expectations, let him know how the process was going to work so that he could make a decision of whether we were the right practice for him or not. And perhaps this would have been a good situation for a referral out to someone else. He was looking for more of a retail experience, and we don't want to provide that. We are wanting to provide an aural rehabilitation experience, so maybe he would have been happier at a retail store or a big box store. So luckily, as clinicians, we learn from our mistakes, and so I'm going to take you through a PROUD process, and this is the process that we now use with every single one of our patients that come in. It's our comprehensive oral rehabilitation process. So this patient was a 65-year-old female. She had a mild sloping to moderate sensorineural hearing loss above 1,000 hertz and only mild self-perceived difficulty, as you'll see in a moment here. She was not at all excited about getting hearing aids. Her spouse, however, was very excited about her getting hearing aids. He was a university professor, very tech savvy. He'd been doing lots of research about hearing aids, and he knew all the latest and greatest on the devices. He was also a very fast speaker, and we knew that because he was there with us, and it was great to have him at this appointment. And he truly was the main motivation for this visit. She wasn't really interested in hearing aids, but he was very interested in having some help for her. So here's our PROUD model, or the PROUD plan that we use with every patient now. It starts with the initial, or the name of this initial appointment. So if you'll remember back to our not so proud process, we scheduled a hearing aid evaluation. Well, this time we have changed the name of that initial appointment to a communication needs assessment, or a CNA. And we've scheduled this appointment for 90 minutes. Dr. Robert Sweeto was calling for this change clear back in 2007, and I'm hoping that I can help him to get it to start catching on in clinics, because a communication needs assessment really more accurately describes what we're assessing and what we're hoping to help these patients with. And from a business standpoint, it's going to set your practice apart right from the get-go, because chances are that not many other clinics are scheduling communication needs assessments, but they're instead scheduling hearing aid evaluations or hearing aid trials. So when a patient calls your office to schedule an appointment and you schedule them a communication needs assessment, they're going to be impressed that you're looking at more than just selling them hearing aids. So the first part of our assessment process are the intake questionnaires. And the first 3 questionnaires are given to the patient prior to the appointment. We actually have them on our website, and so the patient can download them and fill them out from home, or they can fill them out in the waiting room before their appointment. The 3 questionnaires are our basic intake questionnaire, which gets basic patient information. Our hearing health assessment, which we used with our first case, it just takes in information about ear and hearing health, family history of hearing loss, that sort of thing. And then the PACA, which we'll go over next. So the PACA is the Personal Assessment of Communication Abilities, and this form can be downloaded at the website at the bottom of this form at eartrack.com/PACA, P-A-C-A. I like to use closed set questionnaires like this in the beginning because it gets patients thinking about different communication environments, and it encourages them to rate their level of difficulty in these different environments. So it gives them a lot of ideas without having to think too hard. And I always have the patient fill out this form as well as their spouse, if the spouse is with them. And as you'll see in a second here, the spouse had very different responses, and so that gives us a good basis for some more in-depth counseling. So in this case, the patient was reporting moderate difficulty in large groups, concerts and movies, places of worship, and in the car, and only slight or no difficulty in all other situations. But as you'll see from this next slide, her spouse, her husband, had a very different view of her difficulties. He perceives her having much more difficulty than she perceives her having himself. And this is very common for the spouse to be more frustrated with someone's hearing, with their partner's hearing loss than the patient themselves, because they're the ones having to repeat themselves and speak louder. And so it's important to get this information from the spouse. So you can see that all of his responses are shifted to the right, showing that he is rating her difficulty much higher. And then the final step of this assessment process actually happens in person. So those first 3 assessment forms were completed before I even met the patient. So I have a wealth of information before even having the patient step foot in my office. And that's great because the name of the game in private practice is efficiency. And we are trying to fit a lot of information into a short amount of time. So the more that we can do with our patients outside of the actual office visit is really helpful. But the COSI, or the Client-Oriented Scale of Improvement, is something that I feel needs to be completed with the patient because it takes a little more prompting and discussion. This is where the patient actually identifies his or her most difficult communication situations. I like for them to choose their top 3, and we rate them. The COSI can be downloaded at no charge from the website at the bottom of this slide. And then after we've taken in all of that information, and we'll come back to the COSI in a little bit here, it's important to create our plan. But first, of course, we do our diagnostics. And so in a typical situation like this, we do a diagnostic audiogram, we do a quick SIN testing, and MCLs and UCLs. And this gives me basic audibility information, the patient's ability to process speech in the presence of background noise, as well as any loudness sensitivities. So only 45 minutes into our appointment, I feel like I've got a really great and comprehensive view of this patient's hearing and communication needs. So we'll move on to our plan. The first step of our plan is education, and then we get into a little more specific personalized plans for each individual patient. And this is where we go back to the proposed model that we discussed earlier. So this is where we start with the education, resources, communication strategies, and then we work our way up the model through audibility and then possibly auditory training. And the most important part of this is that this model cannot happen without the clinician. So this really is a professional, clinician-centered model, and it shows that we cannot be helping our patients. Our patients' problems cannot be fixed without the professional there with them. They can't just go online and purchase some hearing aids and think that everything's going to be okay. So that's why this model, following this model in your plan, is so important. So the education starts with providing the patient with some important information. Now, education is something that I feel should be kept very simple because the patients are overwhelmed sometimes with all of the information that we're giving them at this initial appointment, especially if we're talking to them about hearing aids as well. They are just overwhelmed by the care and use of the hearing aids, how to change the batteries, all of the technical aspects. And so the other parts of the education that are probably more important sometimes get, pushed to the back of their mind and they forget them. So the 3 aspects that I really try to focus on with my patients are realistic expectations, the importance of communication partner involvement, and communication strategies. For this particular patient, we used the 5 Keys to Communication Success Handbook, but there are lots of educational resources available out there. You just want to make sure that they really are short and to the point and fun for the patient to read. And so the way that I assign this education is I give them the handbook on the way out the door of their first appointment, but I don't give it to them as an afterthought. It's really important the way that we assign this information to our patients because if we give it to them as an afterthought, they're going to think of it as an afterthought. But if we tell them how important this education is, we tell them that we are going to follow up on what they've read at their next appointment, and we give it as an assignment versus just a suggestion, then they're more likely to read this when they get home and have this information in their brains when they get back for their next appointment. The next step is to plug our patients into the local and national resources that are available in your area. And so the local resources will include university oral rehab classes, Many universities put on community oral rehab classes. The faculty and the students put these on at libraries and community centers, and so it's really great to plug our patients into those. And then the local hearing loss associations have chapter meetings, usually on a monthly basis, and so these are great because these allow the patient to connect with other people who have hearing loss and understand what they're going through. Now, I realize that depending on your location, you may not have a university nearby and you may not be in a big city that has local monthly hearing loss association meetings, but I still encourage you to look into these options because you might be surprised how far a patient is willing to drive to connect with people who are understanding what they're going through. So definitely look into the cities in your area and see if they have oral rehab classes and hearing loss association meetings happening. And then on a national level, no matter where you live, you can be plugging your patients into the Hearing Loss Association of America. This is a wonderful organization. The membership to the Hearing Loss Association of America is only $35 per year. And so it is such a cheap, easy way to provide our patients with awesome education. And that membership includes the bi-monthly Hearing Loss magazine. And that is like an oral rehabilitation class in a bright, pretty, shiny magazine that they get in their mailbox every other month. So it is really worth it. In this particular case, my patient was not interested in being plugged into the local classes. She didn't want to go hang out with other people with hearing loss, although I think her husband wanted to, but she wasn't interested in that. She was, however, thrilled with our gift membership to the HLAA. So in our clinic, we purchase a $35 membership for every single patient who purchases hearing aids through us, and she loved that. Okay, so now that we have educated our patients and we have given them the resources that they need if they're wanting to plug into a group class or a group meeting, now it's time to kind of bring this into a personalized plan for this individual patient based on the specific needs that they put forth at the very beginning. And so we use the COSI, the goals that they put forth on the COSI, as our guide for our personalized plans. We use something called the Successful Communication Plan, which goes along with the 5 Keys to Communication Success handbook that I mentioned earlier. These plans can be downloaded at no charge from the website at the bottom of the screen. And so we use those COSI goals. We choose 3 of them and we add them to our Successful Communication Plan. So in this case, I'm going to go through her goal of hearing her husband better around the house. So as we complete the Successful Communication Plan, we have to identify the challenging situation, which in this case is around the house. And of course, we need to identify the communication partners involved. In this case, it's her husband. And then we're going to take them through step-by-step communication strategies to help them overcome their communication challenges in this environment. So this program breaks communication strategies down into 5 different components or keys. And the first key is the environment, modifying the environment. So my patient and her husband have agreed to turn off the television unless they're actively watching it because they both said that it's hard to hear each other when the TV's on in the background. The speaker key is for the husband. He's the speaker in this case, and he agrees to speak slower. He also agrees to go to the same room that she's in or call her name before he starts talking to her. The listener key in this case is for our patient, and she is taking on the responsibility of asking her husband to rephrase versus saying what, and also to repeat what she thought she heard rather than saying what. Because in our initial assessment, it came out that she says what all the time, even if he hasn't even finished his sentence. So we're going back to what we learned and discussed in our assessment as we fill out this form. She also agrees to go to the same room as him before she starts talking. Now this is where auditory training would come in, and we'll get to that in a little more detail in a second here. The technology key is the next piece of this puzzle, the 5 keys. And so the patient was fit with hearing aids, and she originally came in saying that she only needed the hearing aids when she goes to church or when they go out to eat. But after some counseling, and now she has it written in a plan, she has agreed to wear her hearing aids around the house as well, because that is one of her top challenging situations. And then we also fit her with a remote microphone, and we discussed when that might be appropriate around the house as well. And then the 5th key is practice, because we know that none of these tips are going to sink in right away, so we know they have to practice these. And so we assign them the finger touch before talking practice, and this just means that our patient and her husband have to touch fingertips before they start talking to each other around the house. And this is something that we assign to couples often. It's kind of a fun game that they play, and they think it's nice, but it really gets them in the optimal distance from each other, and it also makes them be face to face before they start talking to each other. And so it's a great practice strategy. Okay, so let's talk about auditory training for just a moment. Arthur Boothroyd in 2007 defined auditory training as formal listening activities designed to optimize speech perception. So auditory training can be clinician directed, meaning the clinician is sitting with the patient and going through the training exercises. And there are wonderful clinician directed auditory training programs. Some of the resources for those are the Aural Rehabilitation Foundation and the IDA Institute. And then the next form of auditory training is computerized auditory training. And as I mentioned earlier, this may be a more feasible option for the busy private practice clinician because it can be done by the patient at home and doesn't have to take up clinic time. A couple of options that we use in our clinic and that we offer to the patient are the LACE, or the Listening and Communication Enhancement Program, and RMQ, which is Read My Quips, which is a more of a game-based auditory training program. So some patients will want to do auditory training. They're very excited about it, but honestly, most feel like they don't have time. Maybe it's not necessary. So when it comes to auditory training, if we have patients who we feel would benefit from it, either because they are reporting difficulties in background noise or difficulties with comprehension, or because they have very poor speech and noise scores or speech recognition scores, we need to have some auditory training options in our back pocket ready to offer these patients. And the way that we deliver it to our patients is very similar in the way that we deliver our education. It cannot be thrown out there as an afterthought, like, oh yeah, if you have time, maybe you should do this program, but rather something that we recommend highly. We think it's really going to help them, and we give it to them as an assignment versus an option. So the final part of our successful plan here is follow-up. Now, our patients have been inundated with information about the hearing aids, about how to care and use the hearing aids, information about education, the resources we've been plugging them into, effective communication strategies. Their brains are on overload, and we cannot expect them to remember all of this on their own. And really, the follow-up is so important. Long-term, consistent follow-up is critical for long-term satisfaction and success. So if we are wanting our patients to do really well with their treatment, to remember what we taught them, to use their hearing aids, to recommend us to their friends and family members, to come back to us for their next set of hearing aids, or if they're having any difficulties, we need to make sure that a follow-up program is in place. And follow-up can come in the form of phone calls. It can come in the form of snail mail or traditional paper mail, and it can come in the form of electronic mails or emails. In our clinic, we have chosen to use electronic mail or email as our form of follow-up. We find that email is a really nice and convenient way to reach a lot of patients at once. And email is also relatively inexpensive. There are commercially available email programs if you're wanting to create your own follow-up emails. You can use Constant Contact or MailChimp, and I know there are others, but those are a couple of suggestions. And then there are also commercially available email follow-up programs for audiologists and hearing care professionals. So we use the eTip program that goes with the 5 Keys communication program, and that's what you see on the screen here. It includes one communication strategy tip. In this case, it's a technology tip. And then it includes a homework assignment for them to help them apply that strategy to their own life that week. And then finally, it ends with a hearing aid tip. Also, there's a big, bold message at the end of every email that says, please return to your hearing care provider if you need anything at all. So even if the patient doesn't open these e-tips, they at least have to delete them. And when they do that, they're thinking about their hearing care provider. And so they think, that hearing aid that is sitting in the drawer over there probably should be on my ear, and I probably should contact my hearing care provider. So we send these out to our patients on a weekly basis, and they receive them for an entire year. And this really just helps to keep us connected to our patients for the long run. They're also very easy for our patients to forward to their family and friends, because sometimes the tips that we're talking about are problems that their family members do, like talking from another room or mumbling or talking with a napkin near their mouth. And so it's kind of an easy way for our patients to educate their family members about fixing these communication issues without having to say something to them in person. So it's a nice way to share the education with their family and friends. So before I conclude here, I have a question for you. What is the most annoying word to the family members of someone with hearing loss? And as you'll see on the next slide, what is the most annoying word to the family members of someone with hearing loss? So it truly is all about focus. And if we focus on hearing aids and technology, we just aren't able to reach the patients on a level that makes us stand apart from the commodity options that are available out there. But if we focus on communication breakdowns, fixing those breakdowns, and the communication needs of our patient and their family members, we are solving a much bigger problem than if we're just fixing the problem of hearing, because we know that hearing loss is only one part of communication. And so if we're really doing our job correctly, we will be providing a comprehensive oral rehabilitation program that addresses all of the communication needs that our patients come to us with. So I hope that you'll be able to take this information and use the strategies that I've provided and some of the tools and the websites and implement this in your own clinics as soon as you can. Thank you for joining us.